I'm Heather, and for my Module 5 discussion, I'm going to get right into the questions because I feel like there's a lot of content to cover. So, the first thing that I chose for Chapter 7 was the differences between leadership and management. And I really liked how the authors explained that by using either definitional, conceptual, functional, or behavioral differences. So, the definitional differences explain that management tends to focus on operations while leaders focus it's predominantly on motivation. I mean, it's also on that, I guess, but it's more motivational and inspirational. Conceptually, leadership is looked up to more for guidance, whereas people look up to managers for instructions on what to do. As far as functional divergences go, challenging and empowering were the two main functions for leadership, whereas management, it was more so imposition, stability, and order that characterized it. For behavioral differences, the book explained that managers manage their subordinates' work while leaders lead by example. And then I really liked how the book said, in management, people don't follow you, they obey you, and in leadership, people follow you by choice. All of this was found between page 193 and 94. And I think that the authors made this differentiation because if you already have influence over people, you might as well inspire and motivate them as well. I mean, if your job is to be in charge of people, then, I mean, we've learned through Theory Y and Theory X what works and what doesn't. And, I mean, if you're paying attention to stuff like that, you're going to want to choose the path of motivating people and inspiring them and making them feel like they have autonomy and choices in matters and not just micromanaging them all the time. And then if you want to retain your employees and influence your workplace climate and, I mean, actually your culture too, then it's important to do all of those things. And if you have power, I think that leadership is kind of knowing when and how to use it. And so you're more effective. For the second thing I chose, it was talking about, let's see what the question is, considering your career track and professional history, what are the most important leadership and followership approaches? So for followership, I found that Adair's 4D followership model was super interesting because it's based on job satisfaction and productivity, and given those combinations, it will give you kind of the likelihood that somebody will leave the organization. And he categorizes workers into 4 categories, which include disciples, doers, disgruntled, and disengaged. And I found that the doer type of follower was probably the most fascinating to read about, probably because I think that that's why I qualify for the most part. Doers are motivated and excited about being on the team, but the text also says that no matter where they go in an organization, the grass always looks greener elsewhere. And so, I mean, it kind of made me ponder if I'll ever truly feel fulfilled anywhere for long term, you know, because it made me kind of look back. It was kind of thought provoking. But aside from that, I thought it was an important thing to read about because if the doer doesn't feel like they're being congratulated and affirmed in their success and receiving recognition, they'll go somewhere else and get it. And you don't want to lose an employee like that. So it's important to, you know, stay mindful and pay attention to how employees are feeling. And I thought that the transformational approach to leadership and the 2 sides of leadership, which are transformational and transactional, I thought that was good to read for the leadership aspect of it. I thought that transactional was interesting as it uses rewards to motivate employees. And I feel like that can work to motivate people, but it's not really sustainable. Transformational leadership is where you connect with others through intellectual stimulation, charismatic, inspirational leadership, and individualized consideration. And charisma definitely will get you far in life, and that's clear, so that's self-explanatory. But I really liked how it talked about intellectual stimulation because it reminded me of kind of intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. And I feel like the intrinsic, like internal rewards, is the most seemingly sustainable way to motivate others and get them to be inspired to think outside the box. And then there's awesome feelings of accomplishment there. So, I mean, you want to make your employees feel good and like they're being challenged and like they feel like they have a voice. So I think that that's really good. And we'll move on to chapter 8. So I chose to do the question that said to define and differentiate between identity, image, and culture, etc. And so organizational identity is what people on the inside of an organization say and think about their organization. The members who identify with that organization base their opinion on their perspective and experience rather than what people outside of the organization say. This is all found on page 237, by the way, and I honestly can't remember if I cited the last thing. So those, what I found talking about Adair's model was 205 to 206. But we'll get back to the identity. And we'll move on to image, actually. So it's how the company is viewed externally from an outsider's perspective. And the outlook of this organization is based on multiple sources. And organizational culture is the collective culmination of the individuals within the organization and their personal identities. And then this creates meaning and accepted assumptions that mold the everyday life within an organization. And the text explains how interrelated all of these are and something that you really can't get away from. I mean, I worked somewhere that coworkers think it's completely acceptable to ask someone to work your shift because they're hungover. And individually, most people there were drinkers. I mean, I think everyone basically, almost. So that led to the assumption that it was okay to be forthcoming about the fact you're hungover and didn't feel like working. This is a bar, by the way. So, and it didn't really feel that deep when someone was like, hey, can you cover my shift? You know, and they'd show up if somebody couldn't, so that was good. But it just was so embedded in us that it didn't really seem like a big deal, and we're all friends in a tight-knit family. It's part of our culture and image and identity as well. But at any other place of business, that would be pretty unacceptable, I would say. Discuss the similarities and the differences between organizational identity and identification. So organizational identification is how you socially identify, and then also the unity that you individually perceive and feel within the group, whereas an organizational identity is what you perceive the organization to be. So both are based on how the operation feels to operate on the inside, and I would say that the identity is more so how you feel about the organization, but the identification is how the organization makes you feel, is kind of how I gathered it, I should say it or articulate it. So having a negative identification where I felt left out or not listened to by just one person, which is typically what the problem was, I guess, actually, in my experience, it changed how I felt about the place that I was working and how they operate. So I worked, and I'm talking about my current job too, and I've worked there for 8 years. So, I mean, I can think of many, I don't want to say many because it doesn't happen all the time, but I can think of quite a few times where I've felt that ripple effect. And, you know, when the issue's been solved, then I go back to being excited about work and not dreading it. But it's like, for a while, it really changes my outlook on the whole function of the operation, just based on one person. And sometimes it's just one interaction that had bothered me, you know? So I also equated this to the identification duality, because it has more to do with how people identify with an organization, the more they will interact with others who will feel the same, and that strengthens how they identify with the organization even more so. So I think that the two strengthen each other and begin to work synergistically. Go to the case question, and so from chapter 7, I will talk about Adair's 4D model again. In the case study, 240 and 241 for the last citation. But from chapter 7, so I obviously really like Adair's model, but it was really, I could correlate it quite easily to the case study. Tom brought up things that insinuated that him and other employees were disengaged. Disengaged employee is defined on page 213, and it says that they don't see the value in their work, and they do the minimum amount necessary to ensure their employment. He mentions, Tom, that he learned to keep his mouth shut because his hand had been slapped so many times, and how he was there physically, but his heart had left the building, which was very indicative of the disconnect that he feels, and it was also really sad. And then Kate is clearly a doer, as he's somebody who's disengaged. She's a doer in that 4D model. And if she stays, she'll become disengaged, it seems like to me. And unless she leaves or her expectations are met, she needs to feel fulfilled. Chapter 8, I correlated some things from the text, like as far as the company vision. The statement preached innovation, creativity, and goal-driven organizational image, a goal-oriented organizational image. But the organizational culture conflicts with that. Again, the company seems to me, it's like super lackadaisical, and he mentions, like Tom, when he was talking, how many other people were also as disengaged, and it's basically just sounded like a norm there and a way of life, just get in, get out. So Kate had a completely different perspective of how the company operated, and based on what they said, what they say in their vision statement, and how they present themselves as a company, it seems like they're trying to uphold an image, and I don't know, maybe they really think that too, because this is all from page 237 to what I just said. But I think that the CEO is checked out and disengaged, where he just has illusions of grandeur. I mean, he could have manipulative kind of tactics that this is behind too, but it's hard to really say. But I think that the text concepts we're learning enabled me to have a better understanding of that. And the leadership is very surface and almost, just based on what the CEO is saying, it seems like it's more of a management situation than an actual leadership. And, it seems like the management has intention of leading, but not really any true leadership. And then all the concepts in the book have just given me a better understanding into how much effort and knowledge it takes to be a leader. I mean, some of it's natural, but I think that it takes a lot of hard work and researching these topics on your own. Thank you.